When I started the Martha's Vineyard Beach and Book Club, I really didn't realize what was going on out there to the extent my mom, whose family, the Smiths, moved to Martha's Vineyard in 1891. She grew up there, so she had told me stories about there was an army base called Peaked Hill, very close to her house, which is still there, and we drive by it all the time. And she used to talk about how the convoys of Jeeps would stop in front of the house and buy her mother's warm donuts. My mother's father had passed away very young from a heart attack at the kitchen table one morning, which I think was, a difficult thing for all of them. And it left my grandmother with four little kids. So she did things like she took in laundry and cleaned people's houses and made donuts. And so my mom used to talk about how handsome the soldiers were, how nice they were. And she was only 14 at the time. But what they didn't realize, and I think a lot of people on Martha's Vineyard at that during the war were afraid. They had plenty of plane spotters, and they were worried that Hitler was going to come invade the United States, possibly. And Martha's Vineyard was right there on that would have been where they would fly over first. So they were definitely worried. And there were a lot of submarine sightings, German U-boats all up and down the East Coast, but all around Martha's Vineyard, they knew that those guys were out there. So it was a scary time, but they were just living their lives, and my mother included. And what they didn't realize is the boys, they called them their boys. Some people called them the Cape Cod Commandos. They were being trained. The US military had invited Lord Mountbatten's British commando experts to come to Cape Cod and train these guys because they were training for Normandy. And of course, they didn't know that. The troops didn't know that. The people on Martha's Vineyard had no idea. And so when almost half of them didn't return after Normandy, I mean, they weren't just Martha's Vineyard boys, they were from all over the country. The island was so sad. And my mom used to talk about that a lot, how so many of those boys didn't return. And my uncle was shot down over Messina, Italy during the war. And so it touched people on Martha's Vineyard, it touched my family, but it wasn't something they thought about every day. I mean, they lived on a farm, they had to keep the farm together. And so a big part of the book is about that, but it's also about how the army base kind of took over their property and how there was a mock invasion of Martha's Vineyard. People didn't realize that was happening, and all of a sudden, these amphibious boats were coming over from Cape Cod and staging a mock invasion of the vineyard. One of those British soldiers that was sent over to train the commandos, he's fictitious, is Gil. And yeah, Cadence, who's based on my mother, uh, falls in love with him. But again, it's one of those contentious relationships where, he's taking over their farm because it's waterfront property and they need it in order to train the guys. But they're killing all their plants, and so they have a tough time at first. But part of the story too that will help explain it is there's a dual timeline, and a young woman named Mari Starwood, at the beginning of the book, arrives from Los Angeles, and she has found in her mother's effects the address of this famous painter, Elizabeth Devereux. And so she travels to Martha's Vineyard in current day and confronts this woman and says, "Hey, what's going on? Why was my mother planning on traveling out here? She's never left Los Angeles." And Mrs. Devereaux says, "Well, you better sit down. I need to tell you the story of the sisters who lived in this house because your mother did leave Los Angeles at one point." So the whole story, we're trying to figure out, what is this young woman in current day, her relationship to these humans? And there are lots of options. And one could be Cadence, she could be related to Cadence. She could be related to Briar, maybe Bess, the best friend who's very wealthy but is estranged because she's dating the Smith sisters' brother Tom, who ships off to war. We had a house in Chilmark for 5 years, but I have not missed a summer on Martha's Vineyard in my life. So I didn't grow up there. My mother always wanted to get off of Martha's Vineyard because she felt like it was a little bit stifling, and she wanted to raise her family off island, which she did, but she came back. So I've been there for 68 years, and I have loved every minute of it. So that was one thing I didn't really have to research that much, which was really nice. I've been to Russia and France and everywhere researching my books, but with that one, I already knew what it smelled like and felt like. And uh, I had to do a lot of research on the time period because I didn't know a lot of that. But just in terms of walking around, and that was really fun to already know that there was the Chilmark Flea that my current day character should go visit. All the fun things on Martha's Vineyard to do, plus what it felt like in 1942. Because I mean, I was born in 57, so it wasn't that long after when the island it was just a different, quieter, gentler. So for me, it was really fun to go back to that time. My mother was such a reader. Oh my God. I mean, she loved her kids, but I don't know, books were, I don't know, if she had to choose, it was, I had to include books in this book, especially because it was inspired. Once I decided to go all in on making it my family, I just thought she had a book club. I mean, she loved books so much. And that was really, really fun. I didn't put the columns in, the newspaper columns, until the end. And that was super fun. I love kind of like, I love editing just in general, but I love having a first draft and then looking at it and saying, okay, what else can we put in here? Like a recipe. And one of the things was I thought, Cadence is supposed to be this great writer. Well, let's show people because there's nothing. I mean, writing is a hard thing unless you give an example of what that writing is. So I made her a columnist for the Vineyard Gazette, and that was super fun. So I got to incorporate the book club that way. I also opened the book at a place where my mom and her best friend used to work. Betty Cottle. They were waitresses at this place called the Bayside Club, which today is the Vineyard Haven Yacht Club. But even back then it was pretty fancy. And they had a burgee and, the little flag and shot off a cannon. And so I just thought that was a really fun place to kind of open. That's where they come up with the whole book club idea.